Krishna. Welcome back to our study of the Yoga Sutras. Today we are going to discuss Sutra number 23, where Patanjali is going to give us a very easy method of overcoming our obstacles in the process of attaining Samadhi. So very quickly seeing how we arrived at this point, we went through this whole journey of what does it mean to overcome our chittavrittis, what are chittavrittis, and we also saw what that methodology of practice and detachment will help in the process of involution. And once one goes through this process of involution, one attains a state of Samadhi. We saw the different types of Samadhi as well. And in the last section, we saw what are these favorable factors needed by whose support a yogi can make their own personal endeavor, personal effort to attain that state of Samadhi. In this particular sutra, and in fact in this whole section, a fairly long section from sutras 23 to 28, Patanjali is going to talk exclusively about just one theme, a theme by which is like an alternative for someone to attain that state of Samadhi, unlike the path of self-endeavor that was spoken about in the previous section. So let us see what this special sutra is. Sutra 23, this is how it goes. Ishvara pranidhanatva. So what does the sutra say? So the sutra basically has three words. Ishvara. Ishvara here means the Supreme Lord. Pranidhana. Pranidhana means some kind of a very deep, profound devotional meditation. And va means or. So to put together, right, what Patanjali is saying, why or means he's comparing with something. So basically Patanjali here in the sutra is comparing the methodologies spoken in the previous section with a new methodology which is being spoken of in this section. So putting together, the translation sounds like this: or Samadhi can also be attained by profound devotional meditation on Ishvara or the Supreme Lord. Right? Like I mentioned, this sutra has three terms. So let us actually understand each of those terms, because though it's a very small sutra, but it's a very important sutra, beginning with the word Ishvara, because the word Ishvara has been very conveniently misinterpreted or sometimes very wrongly interpreted by many contemporary authors. So we'll try to understand what exactly is this word Ishvara. So one popular misunderstanding that people have is that Ishvara is also some kind of a Purusha. Ishvara is also a more refined Purusha. Perhaps that would be the popular misunderstanding around, right? Because a yogi, as one goes through their own spiritual journey, through their yogic journey, at a state when they enter Samadhi and then they go beyond Samadhi, such an advanced Purusha is what is referred to as Ishvara. This is one of the popular misunderstandings, right? But clearly, Patanjali here is maintaining a distinction between Ishvara and Purusha. That concept of realizing the Purusha has already been spoken of in the previous sections. Just before, when the Abhyasa and Vairagya, and specifically when Vairagya was being described, there Patanjali already mentioned that the highest form of dispassion is meditation on the real self, the Purusha. So clearly Patanjali spoke about the Purusha earlier. And in order to achieve that state, he is now talking about another form, which is Ishvara. So clearly indicating a distinction between Ishvara Tattva and the Purusha Tattva, the concept of Ishvara and the concept of Purusha. So it is not that a perfected Purusha, a liberated Purusha becomes Ishvara. So this distinction is very clearly maintained by Patanjali. Another aspect to highlight this is, therefore, in the Vedic literature, there is specific terminology used with respect to Ishvara. If Purusha is ordinary soul, living entity, Ishvara is being referred to as Param Purusha. If the Purusha is referred to as Atma, Ishvara is referred as Paramatma. So clearly, by using the term Param as the supreme, there is a distinction being brought about even in the Vedic literature, right? This is also another important understanding, because the word Ishvara comes from the root word Ish. Ish means extraordinary power or sovereignty. In this case, it means that, somebody, the general word Ishvara in itself means any form of controller. Like how I am Ishvara of my body, I can control the movement of my body, right? But then Ishvara does not just mean any ordinary control, but extraordinary power and control. Meaning, even a perfected yogi with all their siddhis or their mystical powers cannot accomplish some things which Ishvara can accomplish. And this distinction also will be brought out later on in the 3rd chapter, when the siddhis, when the mystical powers of a yogi are being described. Clearly there Patanjali maintains a distinction that these are certain things which many yogis can attain, but Ishvara is somebody beyond even the perfected Purusha, who has the greatest of the greatest mystical powers. So this is the distinction that is brought about in Ishvara and Purusha. And finally, this is another misunderstanding that is brought about the nature of this Ishvara. Okay, if at all, okay, let us distinguish between the Purusha and the Ishvara. But then another misunderstanding, even though despite seeing them both as different, the misunderstanding which prevails is that this Ishvara is only impersonal, right? Now, this understanding of personal and impersonal again comes from the Vedic texts. Now, broadly speaking, the Vedic texts, there are the Shrutis and Smritis, right? Or to be more specific, there are the 4 primary Vedas and the Upanishads, which come in the category of the Shrutis. And there are the Smritis, like the Puranas, Itihasas and so on. They come in the category of Smritis. Now, predominantly, the concept of Ishvara has been described with an impersonal note in the Upanishads, and whereas with a very, very personal understanding in the Puranic literature. So certain modern academic scholars therefore try to say that, look, the Shrutis are more important and the Upanishads are dated much prior to the Puranas. Therefore, the original understanding of Ishvara is only impersonal. This is one of the ill-informed conclusions that are derived. But actually, it is not really so. In fact, there are many Upanishads where the concept of a personal understanding of Ishvara, Ishvara having personal attributes, are being described. Like there is Kata Upanishad, Shvetashvara Upanishad, which very clearly talk about this concept of a personal God, a personal supreme being, and clearly this shows that the Ishvara has both personal and impersonal features. It is just like the sun. If you look at the sun, there is a sunlight, which has no form, which is the impersonal understanding of sun. Even right now during the daytime, for example, there is sun in your room, indicating that the impersonal aspect of sun is there all around you. But to say that sun is only sunlight is a very foolish argument, because that sunlight is also coming from a centralized source called as the sun star, the sun globe. That is the personal aspect of the form and the personal aspect of sun. Likewise, Ishvara also is said to have both the personal and the impersonal aspect, right? If that personal aspect, popularly referred to in the Puranic literature by the term Bhagavan, if that is a personal aspect, then the impersonal aspect is his effulgence. The aura around Bhagavan is what is called as Brahman, or the term that is popularly used, that Brahman effulgence, right? So this understanding has to be made very clear. To say that Ishvara is only personal or to say Ishvara is only impersonal, both are incomplete. That is why there's a very beautiful verse, in the Bhagavad Puran that explain that how the seers of the absolute truth have very conclusively stated, after reading all the Vedic literature, they have, they are called as Tattvavits. Tattvavits means those who have understood the truth. So they explain that one non-dual absolute truth has been simultaneously been explained as Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavan iti Shabdayate, has been referred to as Brahman, that impersonal aspect, Paramatma as that localized aspect, and as Bhagavan as that personal aspect. So this is where the maturity of Vedic understanding is needed. The absolute truth need not be limited to be only personal or impersonal, but then both can exist simultaneously without any conflict. So it is that Ishvara that Patanjali is referring to when we are talking about the sutra, Ishvara Pranidhanatva. Then the next word which comes is the word Pranidhana. Pranidhana, Pranidhana literally means to come forward and and bow down. Literally, it means it's like offering your Sashtanga Dandavat, like offering your obeisance out of respect. So why this concept of Pranidhana is being brought about all of a sudden, in the Yoga Sutras, all of a sudden Patanjali is bringing a very theistic understanding of the yogic practice. Why does he do that? To understand that, let's go back to our concept of how the soul, the Purusha, is covered through its different layers of material coverings. If you remember, we spoke about these different layers of mind, intelligence, and false ego, mana, buddhi, and ahankara. Now, through our yogic practice, through our personal endeavor, we can learn to regulate the mind, and we can learn to sharpen the intelligence by study of scriptures and so on, right? However, that layer of false ego, which is right next to the Purusha, right next to the soul, which is the foundation, you can say, of our entire material layers, that layer of false ego is subtler than the intelligence. Meaning, by my intelligence, I can never understand the false ego. Just like how through my senses, if you remember in our drawing, senses was a layer outside mind, right? So if the senses are gross and the mind is subtle, meaning the gross cannot perceive the subtle. Through my eyes, I cannot see what the mind is. But through my intelligence, I can understand, oh, this is how the mind is functioning. We can get some understanding of the mind through intelligence. But the ego being subtler than the intelligence can never comprehend it. And that is why many times we will end up, using our intelligence as a service under the service of the false ego. Meaning that sometimes we may use our sharp intelligence, but we fail to understand that it is being motivated by our own ego. So it's very difficult to see the ego in action. So how do I conquer the ego, or how do I, negate the influence of the ego? That is where Pranidhana comes in. It is only through humility, through prayer, and ultimately through surrender, one can conquer the false ego. And this is the important warning that Patanjali is giving to all the budding yogic practitioners, even a very advanced practitioner, in fact. Because at an advanced stage, what can happen? As a yogi is experiencing that internal bliss, it is very easily possible that a yogi may become disconnected from this outside world, may get disconnected to the suffering of this outside world, and may just become so indifferent to the outside world and be satisfied within. And that is a big trap for a yogi. So in order to extend to the outside world out of compassion, this Ishvara Pranidhana plays a very, very important role. When one is rooted in this understanding of Ishvara, when one sees that how the Purusha has its very unique and individual connection to Ishvara, likewise every other form of life has its unique connection to Ishvara. So seeing that common connection of Ishvara, one connects to the entire macrocosm, which is this entire creation. And that is how a yogi does not become indifferent and get caught up in one's own ego. Therefore, Ishvara Pranidhana plays a very, very important role, whether one is at the beginning stage or even at an advanced stage, to stabilize one's yogic practice, right? And finally, the word va, this also has been a subject of great debate, because by va means or. When the moment you say or, it's like A or B, right? Which means you're giving two choices. So does that make this Ishvara Pranidhana or this devotional process optional, right? And clearly indicating that, so here is, self-realization that can be attained through, your own personal effort, what we saw, by Smriti, Virya, Samadhi, Pragya, we saw those favorable virtues. So by developing those favorable virtues and by one's own effort, one can attain to this stage of Samadhi, or one can take up to the more devotional process. It may come across that way. right? And it is true in a sense, to a certain sense, it's true because self-realization can be attained through a non-theistic process also. But let's try to understand the psychology of Patanjali, right? Look how very subtly, in a very indirect way, he's emphasizing this concept of Ishvara Pranidhana. First, you will see throughout the book, Patanjali talks about his Ishvara 3 different times. It is not just a one-off mention only in this section saying, oh, it's just an optional path. You can do that, but you can also do this. It's not like a secondary process that Patanjali is giving, but he's going to repeat this again and again. Thrice is going to talk about this concept of Ishvara Pranidhana, indirectly indicating his own personal choice that, look, there is this path of by your own effort, but you can also achieve Samadhi through this kind of a profound devotional surrender to Ishvara. And 2, this is one of another very unique deviations that Patanjali does in his style of presentation. You see, the sutras are very terse presentations we have seen so far. Patanjali doesn't bother to even sometimes repeat the terms. He expects you to remember it from the previous sutra and says, he uses the word tat, right? Saying, okay, that which I spoke earlier, that can be achieved this way. So for a person who is so stingy with usage of words, here he is devoting 7 sutras exclusively to talk about Ishvara. So understand, when something is being repeated in a book, which is supposed to be very terse and precise, understand how important or what importance the author is giving to that concept. So this is also another very important hint that Patanjali is leaving for us. And finally, the other 2 places, remember I mentioned there are 3 references of Ishvara throughout the book. In the other 2 places, he does not use the word va or the optional, the or aspect, right? So clearly indicating, that this concept of Ishvara or this theistic devotional meditation is of paramount importance for our success to attain the state of Samadhi, like that. So this is why this is a very revolutionary sutra, because out of nowhere, Patanjali reveals his heart. He introduces a very theistic methodology, and this is what makes the entire yoga process, the yoga philosophy, different from the Sankhya philosophy, which does not emphasize so much on the theistic practices, like that. Okay, so this is what we discussed in summary today. We understood that this Ishvara is not the same as Purusha. It's not the same as a perfected Purusha. And this Ishvara has both personal and impersonal attributes. 2, we saw that how the devotion to Ishvara grounds one in one's spiritual practice by helping us look past the influence of our own false ego. And finally, we saw that how, though self-realization can be achieved through non-theistic methods, Patanjali, by repeated emphasis and giving such such real estate within his book, by 7 sutras here and later on again 2 more sutras, by that we can see by his repetition, indirectly Patanjali is emphasizing, right? Of course, he still keeps it very indirect and not in your face, just to appeal to the non-theistic readers also, like that. So this is a very important section, and let's see in the future sutras, what are those different sutras, what are the different aspects of Ishvara, how to understand Ishvara, who is Ishvara. These are the terms that Patanjali is going to elaborate a lot. So see you all soon in our next sutra. Thank you so much for joining us. Hare Krishna.